This is Zen'n'ish.
Welcome to Zen'n'ish podcast, where we spark meaningful conversations that bring clarity, growth, and a little Zen into our lives. Today, we're joined by Lizzy Gobst, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified EFT tapping practitioner. Lizzy, we're so excited to have you here with us today. And I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, your journey, and what brings you to this work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So it's a long story, but I will try to summarize. When I first started getting my hours toward my licensure, I was working with addiction and eating disorders, and some of the populations that actually marry sort of habit psychology and depth work. And that was really important as I started working with all sorts of different clients. Because what I realized was that talk therapy is so helpful, but there are all of these deeply researched ways to actually motivate us to change that when I started to get into private practice and doing more marketing, that became even bigger. I was starting to see how advertising and marketing, they have so much money to do all the research on what actually gets people to click buy. And I really started thinking deeply about why we don't use this more in therapy. And especially my work with addiction is so much, as you probably know, about like connection and about community and vulnerability and authenticity.
Yes.
And that's a lot of what heals. And so I brought all of that work into my therapy. And at the same time, there was this blogger who was becoming a vlogger. And I was following her and I was noticing that she was just expanding. She was taking all of these business risks. She was taking all of these relationship risks. And she started to make these videos on EFT tapping. And I started to say to myself, like, oh, it's so weird, but she has all this other content that I still like, so I'll still keep following her. And over time, it just became undeniable. I was seeing her change before my eyes, and I was still refusing to try this like wacky technique because it would never work and all of this stuff. And finally, I just kind of bit the dust and tried it.
Why not, right?
Exactly. I mean, this is the thing. And the reason I bring it up is that people do have a lot of hesitation around trying this. And we'll talk about that more later, I'm sure. But when I started doing videos, there's a lot of videos online on certain topics and things like that. But I started to notice that the things that I really, really wanted it for, there weren't videos for. And so that's why I decided to become certified so that I could help myself. And now what I've noticed, I mean, especially when I'm working with relationships, a lot of the relationship approaches are so beautifully researched too. And they have all of these methods. And the thing about relationship work is that a lot of the methods depend on you truly transforming on the inside. Like when you're talking to your partner, you could be using a template of respect and all of this stuff. But if inside you're seething and you're resentful and you're like, well, sweetheart, I'm using the Gottman template, but you can tell that, and, there's these step-by-step processes for repair. And one of them is make sure that you've processed all your family of origin stuff that's getting in the way. And I'm like, okay, how do you do number 3 though?
Right.
And it became really, really evident that a lot of the transformation that needed to happen in order to make these couples scripts even work, you needed to snorkel underneath and get at what is making the template hard to do in the first place? And by the way, the reason that I even started focusing on relationship work was that I was in my first long-term relationship, and I was so out of my depth, and my CEU, my continuing education requirements were coming up, and I was like, well, maybe I'll try just for the clients, of
Right.
And yeah, it's what my work is now, is really marrying the kind of habit psychology and behavior tricks that we have with the depth work, because as you probably know too, like the behavioralism isn't enough if we have, for example, even an addiction, like the cold turkey is only going to do so much.
Right.
We really, really need to look at what is motivating us. And
yeah, I love what you said about snorkeling underneath, because that's so important in the talk therapy and the behavioral therapy. Like you got to go deep. You got to figure those things out. And knowing that deep isn't necessarily always poking the trauma, but you do have to dig deep to figure out those feelings and what they are, and name them truly for what they are before you can ever begin to start to sort those things out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The acknowledgement is such a huge part. And yeah, just the power of naming what the parts are. It's almost embarrassing how that alone can create a feeling of power and relaxation. And
absolutely.
I talk about it as like, if you watched Full House as a kid, like that Danny Tanner moment when you get to like, oh, there's a reason that you're acting out. It's because you're worried about X, Y, and Z, and the music comes on.
Yes.
And that's what self-acceptance does too, is you're your own Danny Tanner, really. You're really snorkeling to figure out, I'm not an idiot for doing these behaviors. There's a reason that I'm doing these. It's because I have a need that I don't know how else to get to.
Absolutely. Yes. Great. So EFT tapping may be new to some of us or quite a few of my listeners. So could you start by explaining what it is and how it works?
Absolutely. So essentially what we're doing is we're creating a somatic feeling of relaxation. We're using our fingers to drum percussively on different acupressure points on our body. So there's a few on our head and our face and our collarbones. And side note, a lot of the time when I do bring this up with people, they look shocked and they're like, oh my God, I just intuitively, sometimes when I'm anxious, I'll just start kind of banging on my collarbones. How funny. And I mean, obviously they came up with this technique for a reason. We are smart. Humans are smart. And like it creates a feeling of relaxation similar to, meditation or any of the other things we would do for relaxation. But the difference is that we're associating it with verbally talking out loud about the challenge or the trigger or the way that we want to be. And that creates a neuro connection between our language and memory center with this feeling of relaxation. So when we go into a public speaking situation, if we've kind of talked to ourselves beforehand and been like, now just imagine the audience in their underwear, it's going to be fine, it's going to be okay, that only has a certain effect. But if we've done sort of like this James Bond work of being like, I am going to feel nervous when I go into my TED Talk, and I accept myself, it creates a different kind of can do, like feel the fear and do it anyway situation. And so EFT is a way to connect the feeling of relaxation with the trigger. It's almost Pavlovian, but it goes a little bit deeper. The other element is that almost everything in our life that we're facing is made worse by stress. Like whether, I don't know, if I have a headache, or if I'm angry at my partner, or if I have a flight the next day, those things are all maybe annoying in themselves. But if I'm stressed about it, that adds another layer. So if I have a headache and then I'm like, how long is this headache going to last? What is the headache from? Is it my fault? Is it because I had this dessert last night? Am I going to ruin the rest of my day? Like, all of those things are going to actually make the headache worse. And so what EFT would do is it might not address the actual pain in my head, but it would make it so that I could feel the pain in my head and be like, you know what, this pain is annoying, and I'm going to meet my friend for a schmooze fest, or I'm going to try to do my work. And if I can't, then I'm not a horrible person. Like, it just kind of addresses that should layer that I find is what actually holds us back from most of the things that we want to do. It's not the anxiety itself. It's not the boundary that we want to set itself. It's that we're afraid of the feelings that we're going to feel if we do that. So that's what EFT kind of helps address.
Awesome. So you kind of mentioned that tapping has helped you personally, as well as with your clients, like improving sleep maybe after conflict with someone. Can you tell us more about that experience and the surprising benefits of tapping?
For sure. And I bring that up because it was one of the first times I really used tapping for my own stuff that wasn't prompted by a video. And it was shockingly powerful, and I was just hooked. So maybe you or your listeners can relate to this experience, but that whenever I would get in a conflict with my husband, I wouldn't be able to sleep that night. And then we would try talking about it the next day. Maybe I would be tired, and then maybe I wouldn't be able to sleep that night. And it wasn't even just affecting my sleep. It was also affecting how willing I was to bring up difficult issues. Because if I was calculating in my head, okay, I want to talk to him about this, but I have this meeting tomorrow and I've got to sleep for this. And it just became, it started affecting so many other things in my life. And that's another reason that EFT is so powerful, is it kind of ripples out, not just to the problem, but to everything that problem touches. And when I started tapping, it was on, being up at 2 a.m. and tripping about this issue and feeling really stupid because I should be able to sleep. Like, I know we're going to talk about it the next day, and there's nothing that I can do now about the problem, right?
Right.
And I just wanted to sleep. I just wanted to sleep. But as I tapped through it, what I noticed was that there was a secondary benefit to not sleeping. And for your listeners, a secondary benefit just means that as much as you want the problem to go away, there's also a really good reason that you have the problem. It's doing something for you. And if it wasn't, you wouldn't have the problem anymore. And so part of what tapping is, it gives a lot of compassion for helping illuminate and uncover and accept that, like, there is a reason that I'm doing this. And what I realized was that the secondary benefit was that it helped show him how upset I was and how sorry I was. Because a lot of the time in conflict, you both say things that you're not super proud of, right?
Right.
And it was both. I was really hurt by what he said, so hurt that I could not sleep. And I was also really sorry about the things that I had said. And what I noticed when I thought about, wow, what would happen if I was actually able to sleep? It might send him the message that, like, yeah, we had this fight, but like, whatever, I'm fine. And I didn't want to send that message. And I think, I grew up in a household and a culture that sort of conveys things through these actions of maybe martyrdom, or just like, I was so upset that I couldn't sleep and I can't believe that you could.
Right.
And there were all these underlying messages that really weren't helpful. But as I kept tapping about it, what I noticed was that there was a little bit of fear and mistrust around the power of words themselves. Because if I think about walking up to my husband and even just saying, I'm still really upset about what happened, and I am sorry about what I said, and I really want to talk through it because it's bothering me. I didn't have trust that those words themselves would convey the same message as I couldn't sleep all night. And so I had to let that go. I had to figure out how to replace the power of that demonstration of protest, of like, look what you did.
Right.
And don't be too mad at me because I'm already beating myself up about this. It was a protection, and it was there for a very good reason, because it's hard to trust that those words are going to be enough.
Yeah.
And that's what I found. So tapping gives you courage, but it also gives you a lot of insight that I found to be difficult to access through just talking. And that was what, kind of a multi-layered tapping issue looks like. Something that maybe you tap on a few times every time it's happening, and you find something new every time that kind of brings you to the next level of the video game.
So what it sounds like is tapping really is a rewiring of sorts.
Yeah. That's what the research shows. If you look at, Dr. Peta Stapleton's work, I think she's done a lot of the brain imaging and the before and after that. Yeah, it's really pretty amazing to look at.
Yes, I agree. So in thinking about this, in what types of situations does tapping work best? Like, how can people begin using it in their own lives, even without formal training?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love about tapping is that you don't need any formal training. I mean, kids can do this. People do it on their pets. It's so adorable. And there's really not a way to do it wrong. And I do a lot of trainings on this, and a lot of the questions that I get are, is it okay if I blink? Is it okay if I accidentally miss a spot, or if I do? And yeah, it's all okay. It's a very layered thing. So even if you just tap on one point and don't say any words, you're going to feel some benefits. And that's honestly something that I do just at a baseline. If I'm at airport security and it's taking a really long time and I'm worried about getting to my gate, I might not go through an entire tapping while I'm trying to take my shoes off and everything and be like, even though I'm worried about being late, but I might just tap on one point while I'm, shuffling forward in line in my socks. Sometimes when I've been on a Zoom call or something like that, I can tap the side of the hand point just underneath the Zoom call and nobody knows. Even things like that for true beginners. Just try tapping on one point. I've tapped as a passenger in the car when I was actually officiating a wedding and I was stuck in traffic and going to be late. I knew they couldn't start it without me, but I also didn't want to walk in to this wedding like, okay, I'm here, we're going to start, and so just tapping on any of the points. But if you want to start to work through an issue, I would say it's something you might talk about on a fifth date. Like, it's something that isn't like the worst trauma that you've ever experienced, because tapping it can be evocative and it can bring emotions up. But it's not something that you would just mention to the postman, because you want it to be a little bit spicy so that you can actually work through it. So things like maybe even our beliefs about money, or if you have social anxiety, a lot of the time after social interactions, I would come home and tap through the fears that I had, or being sure that I'm going to be rejected forever, or whatever it is. And one of the ways that I really like to use tapping, even without doing the tapping, is as a Dumbo feather. And what that means is I actually say yes to more things that I'm scared of, because I know in the back of my mind, even if it's a disaster, I can tap afterward and process it and feel better. And like, it's so magic to have that, that you can sort of, if you're debating about something and you're paralyzed by it, you sort of know that you're going to have a soft net to land on. And I think that's really powerful. But for beginners too, I mean, this is the way that I started, was searching videos on YouTube. And you can Google, some of the big names are Brad Yates and Gala Darling. You can just Google their names and then a comma and whatever issue you're facing, fear of flying, or, since we're recording around the holidays, family dynamics, or feeling pressured by my parents, things like that. You can just Google, and there's usually a 10 or 15-minute video that you can just follow along with, and you don't need any training.
Awesome. I know my favorite go-to are my collarbones. I can't reach anything else. Yes.
Such a good one.
So, what are some common misconceptions about EFT tapping that's maybe tend to stop people from trying it?
Yeah, the first is that they think they're going to do it wrong. They're not trained. I mean, I also get, especially from therapists, the question about how is this similar or different to EMDR? And because EMDR is something that you need extensive training for, that, of course, you don't want to try to do if you're not properly equipped. And EFT is just a different thing. And so that's one of the barriers that people have, is feeling like they're going to do it wrong. The other one that's interesting, because I teach tapping classes, and I actually just went to their graduation last night, and it was so much fun. And one of the things that they noticed was when they would tap through their own issues, they didn't feel that oomph. They didn't feel like it was really working the same way it would if they were tapping with someone else. And I think one of the barriers is that we don't treat ourselves like we would treat other people. It's kind of like when we're cooking for ourselves and we're like, oh, whatever, I'll just make whatever. But if we have friends coming over, we're going to pull out all the stops. We're going to make our dish. For me, it's baked brie and puff pastry with mango chutney melted all up in the middle. And it's,
yum.
That's my dish. But I usually wouldn't make that for myself. And when we're tapping through our own stuff, we kind of phone it in sometimes. And we're like, nah, I don't know. But for people who, are trained and who lead sessions with other people, when they're tapping with someone, they are present, they're bringing it. And so one of the things that gets in the way is that the tapping isn't powerful because you're not bringing it. And so then you're not motivated to do it because it's not powerful. It's not doing much for you. So it's almost like, cooking yourself dinner the way you would someone else, or even wearing lingerie for yourself to go to bed and not just for a partner. Like, things like that can really help remind you that I'm worth the best tapping. The other huge barrier that I think for any healing modality is, if I do feel better from this, then I'm going to be so mad that it took me this long. I'm going to need to sort of grieve that I had to feel the way I felt for so long until I started to feel better. And I noticed this one in myself all the time, and this could be one of the secondary gains of staying stuck, is that if I do feel better, I'm going to be really upset that I had to go through what I went through. And we have to have so much grace and so much compassion for however long it takes us to come to these healing modalities, because we do need to go through what we go through, and then we can have options and see what we want to do. But yeah, you can see how that would be so scary to think about. People usually aren't worried that it won't work. They're worried that it will work.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times it's on a subconscious level, that fear of having to mourn an identity, whether it's a negative or positive thing. It's who you were. It's what you did. It's what you knew. And to
Absolutely.
be able to move about in this world in a different way can be scary. And it's like, oh, well, who is this new person? How do I react and interact with this world?
Yes. Yeah. The new person who also, I mean, you're bringing up the point too, that like a lot of the time feeling into a new identity can mean disconnection. It can mean that the people from your old identity might not fit in your life the same way anymore. Absolutely. It might mean that you got to set some boundaries that you haven't felt ready to set. It might mean you might face some really difficult truths about even your job or your relationship, or the things that it's really helped you to stay in the dark about because you truly weren't in a place to address these things in the way that you might be able to. And yeah, the new identity comes with new sexy problems that you're not just stepping into a challenge-free life. You're figuring out, okay, is this a better kind of hard for me? You know, and so I think that's a really tough one about embracing the new identity. And there were so many benefits that came with the current identity, to your point, that we don't say goodbye until we're ready to say goodbye. And we're still wearing our outfit. Yeah. so yeah, that's a huge one. And then just along those lines, I think with the identity stuff and the belonging stuff, there's a way that in some ways feeling better can make us almost seem disloyal or that we're not, it's along the lines of disconnection, but that if I feel better about this, it's similar to, I know when I was like 15 and 16 and someone would say to me, one day you won't even care about this boy anymore. Yeah. And I'm like, but I don't want to not care. Like that would be such a betrayal to Chad or whoever I was lusting after, And there's an element that like, even though we want to feel better, we know that feeling better will, lead to disconnection. And
that also made me think about a lot of times how people are stuck in certain roles within their families or that group of friends. And then when you have this type of change, it's like, and sometimes you get it externally, like, oh, you've changed, you're not the same person.
Oh, totally.
And that can be hard. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And that also reminds me, so the connection with, addiction, eating disorders, all those things, the reason that feeling disconnected from people feels like life or death is because it was like in caveman times, if we lost our tribe, then we were just facing the elements alone. And so it's programmed in us when we're facing a possible rejection to feel like we're going to die. And still, I mean, loneliness does affect our physical health, not just our mental health. Like this is still true. But I think one of the things that tapping does is it helps you recognize those kind of urgent, like life or death urges, and helps you see in the context of today's world whether that's helping you. I actually apply this to public speaking too, because when you're about to go into a public speaking forum, you get the same feeling as when you're running from a tiger. But the same actions that helped you run from a tiger were that your mouth goes dry, your heart is beating, all of the things that don't help you in a public speaking setting. And so this is part of the rewiring that has to happen. It's not even just family of origin stuff. It's like inner cave woman stuff, not just inner child stuff.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And that actually is a perfect segue into my next thought or question, because I'm thinking about acceptance and what role does acceptance play in the interplay between using tapping for personal growth and advocacy in relationships?
Love this question. Yeah. So the example that comes to mind, if you've seen Sex and the City, or if your audience has seen Sex and the City, there's a moment where Carrie is dating Aiden and he's moved in. And every time she comes home, he's there and he's like, "Where were you? What's going on?" And she struggles with this for a while, and she finally talks to him about it. And she says, "Listen, when I get home, I need a full hour to just be by myself, to be with my thoughts, to just sit, to maybe read trashy magazines, whatever. I need a full hour before we talk." And he said, okay. And he gave it to her. And she came home and she got the hour. And, 2 minutes in, she realizes, you know what? I actually do want to hang with him. Like, come here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always happen that way. But when I think about acceptance, it was the fact that he saw her need and he was like, I see that. I will do that. And he didn't say, "Why do you need that? You shouldn't need that. I'm your boyfriend." And he didn't say, "Well, what about 30 minutes?"
Right.
And I think so much of the time, this is what we do to ourselves. We have a need and we're like, "I shouldn't need that," or "This other person in my life wouldn't need that," or "They would be hurt if I needed that." And maybe that's all true. But when we accept that, we're like, okay, even if it's inconvenient, even if people will probably be mad at me, like, right now I do need that. When we accept it, we actually give space to see all of the options around it. It's almost like, I compare it to shower thoughts, when like you're grinding on something and you're trying to figure out like, what am I going to write for this thing? Mm-hmm. And then when you kind of soften your gaze and you let it go, that's when all the options come in. And so this is why acceptance is so important for these gridlocks that you get into, not just with your partner, but with yourself. Is, again, it's not the thing itself that is the problem. It's not the setting of the boundary. It's not the asking for the support. It's the feelings that we think we're going to have, shaming ourselves for having done those things. And so if we can just neutralize or remove or have compassion for those shoulds, mm-hmm. then that actually allows us to see what are our values, what happens when I do get what I need. Does that change what I need? And, do we create new problems and new needs and things like that? So I think this comes up with couples so much, because even when we think about advocating, which sometimes is almost like the counterpoint to acceptance, is like, okay, right. Well, I could accept this, but I actually want to see if I can get some wiggle room here. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that we don't advocate is that we are so nervous to deal with the other person's judgments about our advocating, or their defensiveness about our advocating, or any of the things that come up. And so in that way, the tapping can really help with both the acceptance and the advocating parts.
Yeah.
And it also helps with, it's almost like in any negotiation, your power comes from being willing to walk away. And so if you come into an advocacy conversation and you're like, hey, I really need this, and if you don't give it to me, we're still going to figure something out. Like, everything in my life doesn't hinge on you giving the exact right response to this advocacy.
Right.
Then you guys have the power of options. And so it really helps to advocate without that fist clench of like, this better go well, this better go exactly the way that I hope it will, or I'm going to withdraw immediately and not even try to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. And I think an important part is the advocacy part is saying what you need and being firm with that, but being open to several different solutions.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. That creativity. And I think a lot of what can open up that world of possibilities, and maybe, you even see it in your work. I imagine it as really similar to when we embody a role in like kink or BDSM, and how just leaning into this one way of being, even though it seems like it would be really like limiting or really close, like defining, yeah, it actually expands and opens up. And it's hard to know that experience until you really feel it. Mm-hmm. But it's similar to even in a business when you talk about niching and how we think, oh, that's going to turn away so many people. But it really, really just helps to focus and even exaggerate. And I think that's such an important piece of relationship work.
Yes, definitely. So, for listeners who have a friend or partner who could really benefit from tapping, how can they introduce it in like a supportive kind of way?
Sure. The first thing I would say as sort of a prerequisite is to tap through your own feelings about why you want them to tap. Mm-hmm. And that really helps you bring true support and true acceptance to the conversation. Because a lot of the time, the reason that we want someone else to tap is that we have a hard time sitting with their pain or sitting with their ambivalence or sitting with whatever they're facing. And it's really easy for us to say like, oh, you should tap on that with the parentheses of like, because I'm done listening to you. And in that case too, if you tap through your own feelings about it, what you might come to is actually that you want to set a boundary with that person. And you're like, listen, I really want to support you. I feel a little out of my depth here. And so I'm happy to help you find resources or support. But I'm coming to the end of my bandwidth. And I actually, I had a friend say to me, and this was I think about this years later, because it was around the holidays. I was having a horrible season and I was just venting to this poor guy. Mm-hmm. And he listened for hours. And at one point he said to me, he was like, Lizzy, I've got like 5 more minutes in me and then we're making cookies. And I just thought that was so loving.
Yes.
Even though I was like, well, I'm definitely using my 5 minutes, like, because I'm not done. Right. And then we started making the cookies and I was like, oh, this reminds me of another thing. And he's like, nope, it's cookie time.
It's
right.
Cookie
and like,
time. Yeah.
And so that's my very first suggestion, is to get really clear on like what you are hoping for from your friend or your partner, whoever, mm-hmm. from doing this thing. And on a related note, a lot of the time what happens is that people ask you, like you were saying, Dr. Kiki, when people are like, you've changed, sometimes it's actually a positive thing. And they're like, you always have the best energy, like, or you seem different. Like, what are you doing?
Yes.
And then you can sort of be, give your little secret of like, oh, I've been tapping. Like, do you want to see what this is about? But yeah, the way to bring it up is with regard and concern, but not attachment to whether they say yes or not, but just to say, there's this technique that I've been reading about that I think it's sort of the new meditation, but the reason that it helps is you actually get to talk and even vent and exaggerate about the things that are bothering you. Mm-hmm. And so you're not just kind of sitting in a quiet room and seeing your thoughts pass like clouds, but you actually get to be like, even though my partner's being so annoying right now, I love, accept, and forgive myself. Like, you actually get to say the petty things.
Right.
And it might be really helpful because I think it's important to give these things a voice. You're going through a lot. But I think it'll help kind of move the emotions and give you more options if you're interested. Mm-hmm. So that's how I might bring it up with someone that I care about, and maybe even doing a video with them. I've done that with some of the people that I'm close to, and it's been a really fun bonding experience.
Very cool. So for someone who's curious but hesitant, what's one simple first step they can take to exploring tapping?
Yeah, I would say start with one of the online videos. Do, a quick 5 or 10 minute one, and you don't even need to do the whole thing. You can even just watch it. But find a practitioner who kind of speaks to you, because there are so many different people out there. I don't know if you've seen Tap with Brad's stuff, but he's kind of like the adult version of Mr. Rogers, I would say. Like, he knows what you need to hear before you even know that you need to hear it, right? And he plays a lot with his videos, like the one, he's got one for insomnia where he's just wearing his PJs and he's like, oh, you can't sleep either. Like, let's, and then, the vlogger that I was talking about, Gala Darling, she's got this like awesome New Zealand accent. She cusses a lot. She's got pink hair and like wears all these bright outfits and talks a lot about, she's more in like the kind of coaching, kick your butt with glitter space. And like, you've really got to find a practitioner that speaks to you. Mm-hmm. And so that would be, I guess, the first step is figuring out who's your tapping style, and then doing a 5-minute video and seeing if you notice any shifts. And if you don't, that's okay. And sometimes they come a day or two later. I've had that happen where I didn't realize that something affected me. And then I'm approaching the challenge a few days later and I'm like, wait, aren't I supposed to feel nervous about this? But yeah, there's really a low bar for this, because you can do it by yourself. You don't even need to be with a live person. And you don't have to tell anybody that you've tried this. And I understand that it might be a challenge. And again, I would choose that 5th date topic. I wouldn't start with something that is devastating you. Mm-hmm. Maybe even 2nd to 5th date. I would start with something that's really light, that you'll be able to feel the difference, but that it's not going to cause a lot of disruption to your life if you get really into something.
Or you really need a therapist there with you. So
that's a really good point. Like so tapping is an auxiliary. It's not a replacement for therapy. And yeah, it can really help with, I almost picture it like a Jenga tower. Like, there's some of the blocks that, when you're by yourself or you're with a video, there's some blocks that come out pretty easily that that don't make the whole tower fall. Yeah. But if you're finding that something is affecting your life significantly, if it's affecting work, relationships, all of that stuff, then a therapist is almost never a bad idea.
Right. Very much so. So, Lizzy, for listeners who want to dive deeper into EFT tapping or connect with you, what's the best way to get started?
The best way would be to email me because I have so many things going on, and because I'm a tapping human, I am always transforming my practice and my offerings and my career. And so I don't always even update everything with everything that's going on behind the scenes. So email me for what's already happening and email me with requests for what you want to happen. So I'm always posting YouTube videos. You can find that through my website, the Interdependence Lab. Coming up, there's going to be an online program for brides-to-be to manage all of the stress and the challenges that come up with wedding planning. Ooh. And setting boundaries and being the center of attention and going through this huge transition. And also just having this tool for yourself so that whenever you're stressed, if you're trying on dresses and you're in the fitting room, you will know how to do this for yourself. So there's a lot of things like that coming up, and relationship challenges over email, things like that. So emailing me is the best way to stay updated on those offerings.
And just to be clear, they can find the way to email you / contact you through your website. And your website is theinterdependencelab.com.
Exactly. And my email is lizzy@theinterdependencelab.com.
Awesome. Great. So, Lizzy, I want to thank you for bringing your warmth, your creativity, and expertise to today's conversation. I've truly enjoyed this conversation. We've learned so much from you, and I really thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it was such a pleasure to chat and to hear your thoughtful ideas too.
Awesome. And thanks for tuning in to the Zen'n'ish podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who could benefit.
Zen'n'ish copyrighted podcast and website offer opinions of Dr. Lakeisha Hudson, Dr. Kiki Zen'n'ish LLC, and/or guests. Content is for information only, not medical advice. Consult a professional for health concerns. Opinions are personal and do not reflect workplaces. Privacy is a priority. All names may be altered for confidentiality. Not for legal use. No guarantee of accuracy. No doctor-patient relationship established. For errors, email 423.4.doctor.kiki@gmail.com.